Towards the end of his very famous sermon at the royal wedding, presiding Bishop Michael Curry described how the French theologian and Jesuit, and those were the things he was, described how the discovery and the harnessing of fire is perhaps the greatest technological discovery in all of human history. The discovery of fire made human civilization possible. It's allowed us to cook food and provide sanitary ways of eating. It's enabled human migration and allowed us to move into cooler climates. Fire made the Iron Age possible, the Bronze Age possible. It made the Industrial Revolution possible. Automobiles and airplanes rely on combustion and the harnessing of fire in order to operate. So Desjardins said that the discovery of fire was the greatest technological discovery in all of history. And if humanity can ever capture the energy of love, it will be the second time in all of history that we have discovered fire. And Bishop Curry ends his sermon by saying, we must discover the redemptive power of love, because when we do, we will make of this old world a new world. On this fifth Sunday of Easter, our lectionary for the morning takes us back to a moment before the crucifixion. And the literary context of this passage sheds some insight into the meaning of this text and also into the character of love which defines the Jesus community. Now, at the beginning of this chapter in which this morning's lesson is situated, there's the familiar scene of Jesus washing the disciples' feet and drying them with a towel that's wrapped around his body, teaching them about servant leadership. But it's also in this chapter that Judas gets up to leave the room to betray Jesus, an event that will eventually and ultimately lead to Jesus' crucifixion. And ironically, in John's Gospel, it's the crucifixion where Jesus is glorified, when he is fully recognized as the Messiah. But in any case, when Judas gets up to leave the room, Jesus knows what it means. He's aware that he is being betrayed, but he's also aware that the other disciples in the room don't fully comprehend what's happening in this moment and what will happen as a result. So the betrayal is already in motion. Jesus' crucifixion is looming. And Jesus has a moment to say what he wants to say to his disciples before they are thrust into the chaos and to the suffering that's about to ensue. This passage marks a transition to the farewell conversations that Jesus has with his disciples. And as we hear, there's a certain tenderness to this passage. Jesus addresses a room of full-grown men as little children, an address that's supposed to convey the intimacy and the importance of this special moment. And without trivializing this passage, it kind of reminds me of one of those scenes from a movie where there's that final intensive conversation between characters where one of them knows that he or she is not going to be around much longer and they want to convey something important to the other. I can't help but think of the old Star Wars movie, Return of the Jedi, the one back in like the 80s, not any of the new ones coming out. But the Return of the Jedi, at the very end of the movie, and this is a spoiler alert, so if you haven't seen it and you want to watch it, cover your ears right now. But at the end of the movie, when Darth Vader, who's now come back over to the good side, takes off his helmet and his mask to look at his son one last time and to say to his son, Luke Skywalker, that Luke has saved him. Or at the end of The Lord of the Rings, where Gandalf says goodbye to the hobbits for the very last time, and he tells them, go in peace, my friends. And he says, I will not say, do not weep, because not all tears are of an evil. There is a tenderness to this particular scene. And the words that Jesus offers to his disciples are words that they are supposed to carry with them for the rest of their lives. And Jesus doesn't beat around the bush. He gets right to the point. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. That you love one another. There's no messing around with Jesus. He's telling them exactly what he wants them to know. And the context of this passage, Judas betraying Jesus, Jesus washing his disciples' feet and saying goodbye to them, make this commandment more of an honest plea. Jesus wants his disciples. He desires his disciples. He hopes for his disciples to abide in this way of life, this way of love that he makes known. He wants them to care for one another. He wants them to forgive each other, just as Jesus is going to forgive his tormentors that put him to death on a cross. One New Testament scholar writing about this new commandment says, "This new command is simple enough for a toddler to memorize and appreciate, and it is profound enough that the most mature believers are repeatedly embarrassed at how poorly they comprehend it and put it into practice." Jesus calls his followers to focus in on this one thing, but boy, how difficult is it for us to put it into practice in our daily lives and on a regular basis. And yet, that's exactly what Jesus commands us. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. There are all sorts of arguments for God. We have creeds, we have the New Testament. But before these things were developed, Jesus stressed that people would know his disciples by how they lived. When we see somebody who embodies Jesus' hope, who embodies God's love, who trusts in God in the midst of all that life has in store for us, it can make a profound impact on us and how we view and how we come to know God. Who are those people in your life who have demonstrated God's love to you? Think about it for a moment. Think about it after church, too. Meditate it on for a whole week or so. It's an important question to think about. Maybe your family members, your friends. Who are those people who you see and you think to yourself, the way that person lives is the way that I want to live? I bet you there are people in the pews sitting right next to you and around you who have demonstrated God's love to you in one way or the other. Bishop Jeffrey Lee, the Bishop of Chicago, who will be here at St. Simon's on June 2nd, by the way. And I do hope you're all able to come because it's going to be his last time visiting St. Simon's before he retires next year. So June 2nd, mark it in your calendar. But Bishop Lee has said that the best form of evangelism is to live into the way of life that Jesus makes known. And then when people ask you, why do you live the way that you live? Or why do you do the things that you do? To simply say, because I'm a Christian. The new part of this commandment that we hear this morning is that it points to Jesus as its model. Just as I have loved you, you are to love one another. And that, my friends, undoes all of the limits. It's a kind of love that is aware of the consequences, a kind of love that is aware of the challenges, and most importantly, it's a kind of love that loves anyway. Madeleine L'Engle, the author of Wrinkle of Time, and she was also an Episcopalian, wrote, "We draw people to Christ not by loudly discrediting what they believe, by telling them how wrong they are and how right we are, but by showing them a light that is so lovely that they want with all their hearts to know the source of it." May we discover the redemptive power of love and make of this old world a new world. Amen.